This is the Vermont House Committee on Commerce and Economic Development. It is Friday, February 10th at 9:02 in the morning. We generally use our first half hour here before the floor at 9:30 to hear from our UVM legislative interns. So Ben and Allie, good morning. Thank you for joining us. Allie, if you want to join us here. I believe Ben is on Zoom with us this morning, so welcome both of you.
Thank you.
Who wants to go first?
I don't know who wants to go first. I can go first. Good morning, Allie Schaefer, Vermont or UVM legislative intern. So this week I have three things to share with you this morning. I covered the Women's Caucus yesterday. Just a brief overview of that meeting. There was a guest, Allison Lamanga from Vermont Works for Women. She was discussing some of the programs that they have started and are working with, specifically the BEAM program, which I'm planning to do some more research on to have some more information for you next week on that program. It's a program with Middlebury College that's providing recently released individuals with opportunities for work and housing with the college. So
can I just interject?
Yeah.
That? So that program is a result of the $420,000 and the $300,000 that we put into our workforce development bill for the
SLF.
correction system and SLF.
Act 183, yes. All right. I'm just going to go right into a summary of the Vermont Employment Growth Incentive Program, their annual report from 2022. The Vermont Employment Growth Incentive, or VEGI, is the acronym. It provides incentives from the state to businesses to encourage economic activity in Vermont, growth that would not occur at all or not occur in the state or would occur in a less desirable manner. There's a lot of definitions of application statuses that are in my summary that I don't think I'm really going to spend time going over because they're kind of long and nitty gritty. But overall, the summary from 2022, there were 141 applications considered. 51 were approved. That's 36%. Approved and concluded are different in their definitions. The approved is incentives are authorized and they're within, they're in the stage of maintaining their growth goals and kind of, they have the money, but it's not, they're not concluded in their economic growth goals yet. So that's 36% approved, concluded 16%, and then canceled or terminated is 45%, and then denied is 3%. Canceled or terminated, canceled is cancellation by the applicant, and then termination is the application had authorization for incentives, but were revoked at some point due to failure to meet or maintain all performance requirements. So there in total, there's $51 million authorized either in the active initial, active final, or the complete stages of applications. So of that, there's the total incentives considered is 111 million, but 51 million is incentive money that's actually being used. So all in all, the applications, when the applications are approved and the goals are met and maintained, the incentive program is successful. And more than half of applicants, 52%, are within approved, complete or active or concluded statuses. And then the 48% is within canceled, terminated, or denied. So I have a lot more information on this report, but I'm just gonna stop it there for that one. And Andrew has that document from this week, if anyone's interested. Lastly, I'm gonna go over a House Corrections and Institutions meeting that I covered on the 7th of February. It was on the 50-50 work schedule of correctional staff with both Nicholas Demmel, the Commissioner, Department of Corrections, and Steve Howard, the Executive Director, Vermont State Employees Association. So they each had an hour. So I'm going to go over the Commissioner's testimony first. So the Commissioner began the discussion by speaking on some collected data from staff on the success of the 50-50 work schedule that began in September. And this is a 12 hours on, 12 hours off schedule. And the House Corrections and Institutions Committee was interested in challenging the success of this work schedule and program. And despite the Commissioner sharing data that showed its success and likeness among the staff, Representative Michelle Boslin brought up some personal stories of her visiting correctional facilities and speaking with staff, and she brought up some dislike of the program, which kind of was in contradiction with what the Commissioner was sharing. So they continued on, and the Commissioner emphasized that the 50-50 program resulted in more predictable schedules. Although the hours are high, the employees are predicted to have more consecutive days off in a row, but they are working 12, sometimes more hours per shift. That's the standard. And he spoke about how with their staffing issues and their staffing level problems, lowering those hours at this point is not possible. Representative Michelle Boss-Dunn spoke again about the frequency of staff being on call, even when they're not scheduled, and many having to work 12 to 16-hour shifts at a time. And this is from her speaking directly with staff. The committee started to question the validity of the DOC surveys and if the staff are giving authentic answers to them. And the committee really urged the Commissioner to share a realistic view of the situation, and successes are important, and their efforts are important, but even if the progress is not stellar, it's necessary to share kind of a reality of the situation. So they spoke about Representative Troy Hedrick's focus on the difference between intent and impact of the 50-50 program to illustrate the fact that the department has had a history of a lack of communication between the staff and the central office of the DOC. After that, the Commissioner began to address the shortcomings of the DOC a little more directly, and made clear that they are trying to make an effort to provide staff with a better work-life balance. And yes, yeah, that was his final point, was that the communication has been at times really horrible between the central office and the staff. But they are working towards addressing that. Okay, moving on. So Steve Howard, the Executive Director of Vermont State Employees Association, he was there on behalf of representing the employees in the DOC, and he was testifying to the severity of the workforce problem. So he consistently emphasized the lack of support from the governor and the central office of the DOC to help solve the management and workforce issues that are occurring. The committee was again trying to address this chasm between the staff and the central office that they discussed with the commissioner that exists, perhaps due to distrust with employees and the department, which has had a potential to potentially skew data results. Mr. Howard confirmed that this distrust exists and is a driving force of the issues and communications between the central office and correctional facilities. So Mr. Howard continued to emphasize that members of the VSEA feel like they have made good faith efforts to outline ways to retain staff and support staff, which haven't been fully acknowledged by the department. In the same vein, Mr. Howard detailed his main concern is that the governor hasn't responded adequately to the needs of the DOC staff, who are currently extremely overworked and have an increasing number of suicidal ideations among them. The committee unanimously agreed that the attention and resources need to be allocated to correctional facility staff. However, they did question the nature of Mr. Howard's testimony. He repeatedly mentioned how the actions of the DOC will be perceived by members. For example, the hiring of a communications director will be seen as unfavorable. And from his perspective, this implementation is another example of mismanagement in the central office that doesn't directly impact the issues in the facilities. This was met by some pushback by committee members, specifically Representative Tristan Roberts, who asked clarifying questions to make sure that the VSCA is communicating all efforts of the DOC and central office to members and not just what they may perceive as shortcomings. After hearing the commissioner's testimony, where he acknowledged pain points in the system and outlined ways in which the department is trying to fix the issue, the committee was reluctant to agree that no effort is being made by the central office and the commissioner. The committee further questioned Mr. Howard's testimony and asking whether the proper senior channels are being followed to reach the governor and his staff on these issues in an effective way. So they asked him to seek some other avenues to reach the governor. So Mr. Howard closed with emphasizing that he was there to testify on behalf of the staff and employees of the DOC who are working under a system that desperately needs attention, and that was agreed upon by the committee as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's all I have for today. So turn it over to Ben.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ali. Ben Donsbach, UVM legislative intern. Sorry, everyone, that I couldn't be there in person today. I had a prior engagement, but I am excited to get back next Friday, and I'll be there in person. I had a lighter week this week as far as stuff I was covering, so should be able to go through it pretty fast. I have a few notes on the rural caucus. I'm covered 2 reports and a few notes on the Senate Economic Development. They're still working on the omnibus housing bill. Just took some notes on some of the development, some of the changes they made to some of the language, and not as much relevant to you guys' work as there was last week. One thing I will say is I picked up on the timeline for the omnibus bill. It seems as if they will be finalizing some stuff up next week and then hoping to pass it out of the committee the following week. So they should be wrapping that up and moving on to economic development issues soonish. So starting with some rural caucus stuff, I met with Representative Jerome and Amy Spear from the Chamber of Commerce about Tourism Day, which is coming up on March 22nd. I'm going to be working with Representative Jerome to hopefully make it go all smoothly, and I'm really excited for that. And then there was also, so in the rural caucus, Representative Jerome talked about that, and then they also brought up there was discussion about the Vermont Forest Future Strategic Roadmap, which is an interesting program that was part of Act 183, and it addressed the future outlook of the forest industry and key aspects, including the workforce. Its purpose is to strengthen, modernize, and protect the forest industry. And they're developing a roadmap in partnership with FPR, Future IQ, VSJF, and Vermonters themselves. They're currently in the planning and engagement process, which includes an advisory panel meant to make sure the engagement process is transparent. And they're meeting with state agencies and experts as well as conducting outreach. So just looking ahead, so what key drivers they're looking to see what key drivers will change the forest future 10 years from now. For example, one example they brought up was demographic change and how that will, change the way that we addressed our forest issues. And they identified the next engagement steps as community sessions which will be taking place on February 27th to March 3rd, some industry sessions that will be taking place from March 26th to 31st, and then some focus groups which will be planning strategic actions. Another program brought up in the Rural Caucus was the Naked Table Project, which is a really cool thing where it was planned by Charlie Shackleton in partnership with Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund, and it connects people to the environment while they make things by hand. So basically, it brings people together, they work on a table together, and then they share a meal around the table, and it connects them to the forest and the economy which relies on the forest. So those are just two interesting things that were brought up in Rural Caucus. I'll move on to the reports that I covered this week. Is there any questions before I do that?
And I just want to add on to your Naked Table Project. They're going to have a dinner on the State House lawn after making all of these tables. And I guess people who make the tables can all come and share this giant dinner or lunch or some sort of meal on the front lawn. I just can envision all the Commerce Committee being.
I was gonna say, yeah, can we get a table?
And making I think it's gonna be sometime in September. So if that gets going and stays on course.
Yeah, it seemed like a really neat idea.
Really neat idea, yeah. And Charles Shackleton is this really famous furniture maker that it's really interesting spearheading this project to kind of connect the forest industry, local forest industry, and the craft of furniture making. Yep.
All
Thanks,
right.
Max.
Yeah, no, of course. So moving on to I summarized the consumer assistance program, which specifically the employee misclassification report, which is part of Act 85 from 2020. It was submitted by the Attorney General's office. So in line with Act 85, it's the Attorney General's office is submitting results of its coordinated efforts with the Vermont Department of Labor to investigate employers who may have misclassified employees and did not pay contributions to the State Workers' Compensation Administration Fund or the Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund. Just highlighting some investigations that they've done, the Workers' Compensation Division investigated 23 complaints of businesses operating without proper insurance coverage and issued 17 citations, which amounted to $291,800 in penalties. The UI division conducted audits and found 90 cases of misclassifications with 721 misclassified workers amounting to $51,822 of unpaid contributions. The Attorney General's office investigated 5 employers and who did not comply with the Department of Labor's investigations and obtained records from 3 of these employers revealing that approximately $30,000 in past due contributions and penalties were owed. The remaining 2 employers continued to not cooperate with the Attorney General's investigation, which resulted in $2,500 in civil penalties for each case, and investigations are still pending for those 2 cases. Future actions which the Attorney General's office plans to take involve continuing to work with the Vermont Department of Labor together in these investigations to ensure that continued support for the State Workers' Compensation Administration Fund and the UI Trust Fund are followed through with. The Vermont Department of Labor and Attorney General's office will submit another joint report regarding enforcement activities and proposed recommendations on or before January 15th of 2024. All right. And then my second report I covered this week was another report from the Attorney General's office. And this one is their recommendations and actions that they've taken against robocall legislation in the 2023 session. This was part of Section 58 of Act 183. And so the Attorney General's office has delivered its findings and recommendations for legislative action on robocalls in Vermont. The report outlines federal laws which have been implemented to prevent robocalls, which include the two main ones are the Telephone Consumer Protection Act, which is the TCPA, and the Telemarketing Consumer Fraud and Abuse Prevention Act, which is the TCFAPA. So the report then goes on to outline a few Supreme Court cases that have had an impact on this issue. The two that they identify are Barr versus the American Association of Political Consultants Incorporated and Facebook Incorporated versus Duguid. And they also discuss the implications of these decisions. Barr had beneficial implications for consumers as it maintained the illegality of political robocalls and invalidated federal debt collector exemptions. However, Duguid had the potential of increasing unwanted robocalls due to the Supreme Court's definition of automatic telephone dialing systems, or ADTS. So the report then moves on to the actions which the Attorney General's office has taken against robocalls. Several steps have been taken in Vermont, which include the creation of a robocall enforcement team, which identifies companies responsible for bringing calls into the state. And then the office also joined a nationwide anti-robocall litigation task force, which includes all 50 states, and is purposed with investigating and pursuing legal action against foreign telecommunication companies that bring calls into the U.S. In addition, the AGO has also undertaken action against two U.S.-based telecommunication companies who were relaying robocalls from overseas by relying on the legal theories that these companies violated both the TCFAPA and the TCPA. So an interesting part about that is, and this was what I'm about to get into in the recommendations, the report identified that Vermont law is not consistent with the TCFAPA and that it does not provide, it does not identify it illegal to go after companies that provided substantial assistance to illegal robocallers from like other countries. So the report basically identifies that or recommends that Vermont law be amended to prohibit U.S. companies from providing illegal robocallers from overseas with providing substantial assistance. The report suggests that the amendment include a requirement that telemarketers are required to begin calls by identifying the seller whom they are calling on behalf of, as well as a telephone number that accepts incoming calls by that seller. Basically, bringing more transparency to these calls. Additionally, in order to mitigate the fallout of the Duguid case, which I mentioned earlier, the AGO recommends that Vermont strengthens its mini TCPA and more broadly defines its definition of automatic telephone dialing systems, which is what Florida did in a similar law. And the AGO is basically recommending that we follow a similar path as Florida. That's all I have for that report. Is there any questions on those two? I can answer them now. If not, I'll just move on to my brief notes from Senate Economic Development. All right.
You can go on. Yeah.
Yeah, we only got about 4 minutes.
Gotcha. Yeah, this is very brief. I don't have much to cover here. So they're on draft 6.1 of the Omnibus Housing Bill. So one of the interesting things that they were talking about was the statewide zoning atlas, which is highlighted in section 5, and basically how that is going to map zoning data across the state. It's a repository of data, and its intent is to take the information that they're getting and really just make sense of it because there is so much. Senator Clarkson requested an initial report back on this map so that the committee has a notion of how useful this atlas will actually be, and what they can do to really improve, the coherency of the information on there. Section 6, they made an amendment to the language, which is striking the ability for any 10 persons in a municipality to appeal a zoning decision by an administrative officer. Basically, it's limiting the ability of groups such as interest groups to really have an effect on these decisions. Sections 7 and 8 kind of went together, and it was an approval for subdivision plats, basically telling towns that they're allowed to give administrative officers the ability to approve minor and major subdivisions, but there's a hearing required for major subdivisions. The committee decided that this language was confusing because major and minor is not defined, so they're striking these terms from the language. And basically allowing municipalities to define when a public hearing is needed in their bylaws. And bylaws may establish the circumstances for administrative officer review. The only other thing that was really changed in Wednesday's meeting was clarifying language in section 9. Basically, it was a clarification for existing language dealing with the appeals to environmental court and after permit decisions have been made. It's taking into account the character of the area, and if the character of the area has been met, the determination cannot be challenged. And that's all I really picked up on. Again, it looks like they'll be moving through the omnibus bill sometime in the next 2 weeks, and we should be getting more into more workforce issues.
Great.
Yeah. Thank you. Very informative.
Thank you both for this morning, for all your work you do for us. It is very helpful.
Yeah.
We really appreciate it. Thank you.
Welcome. Thank you.
Any questions, committee? Okay, we have the floor, so it's the last day for the pages. It's hard to believe we've gone through 6 weeks already, but so if we get out there to say goodbye to them. Then we have training on the floors now. So we don't have anything in here until 1 o'clock. So H87, there's a new draft that we'll have. We'll walk through that with David and with the department, and we'll wrap it for the day and for the week. And on Tuesday, I'm hoping that we'll hear from everyone involved in H87 and see if everybody is on board, and if we want to try to get that bill out so we can get it to Ways and Means to get it on the floor at the end of the week.